If you're wondering what's happening in the Edmonton real estate market right now, then this video is for you. I thought I would do sort of a mid to late August market report on what's going on in the Edmonton housing market. I've done previous videos where I looked at the stats for July, so I don't have all the stats for August yet, but I wanted to kind of talk about general market conditions and what you could expect, whether you're a buyer or a seller, and kind of different opportunities, but also just market conditions, what's actually happening in the real estate market right now. So I'll start with saying that there's less competition among buyers and more competition among sellers. And what I mean by that is if you're a buyer, there's not as many of you now as there were before, and there's a lot more listings. So you'll find that you don't have to compete on properties as often. You're less likely to see multiple offers. You can take your time a little bit more. You don't have to necessarily worry about properties going just like that and selling incredibly quickly. There's always going to be some properties that sell quickly, especially the really nice ones that are priced right and are highly desirable, but you're not going to see that on every single property like what you saw earlier this year. And if you're a seller, the reason I said that you're going to have more competition among sellers, it's because there's more sellers competing for a smaller pool of buyers than there were before earlier this year. So when I say before, I mean like February, March, April, May, June, and even July to some extent, but July slowed down quite significantly. We're now overall in a buyer's market. So the buyers are calling more of the shots now. You're able to negotiate on price, and the sellers are having to get a lot more realistic on their price and usually make sure that it's very attractive right from the beginning when you've listed it. You might have to do some price reductions if you don't quite get it right, and the market is shifting right now. One of the things that's causing this is that there's more inventory. So I pulled some of the stats today, and there's currently 6,601 active listings in the city of Edmonton. And just to kind of give you another reference point, there was 4,199 active listings at the end of March 2022. So going from March to, I think today's August, we basically have had a 57% increase in the number of properties that are available for buyers that are looking now versus the buyers that were looking back in March earlier this year. A few other stats I wanted to look at here. So just comparing basically July. So I'm looking at July stats because I'm using end of month stats here, just to kind of put this year into perspective on how the market is performing compared to the previous 5 years. So in July 2022, we had, at the end of the month, there were 6,608 active listings, and there had been 1,375 sales. And that works out to 4.8 months of inventory. And just to kind of give you some context, months of inventory is how many months it would take to sell all the current active listings if sales continued at the same rate that they currently are. So there was 4.8 months of inventory at the end of July. And that's just looking at all residential in the city of Edmonton. In July 2021, there were 6,495 active listings at the end of the month and 1,534 sales. So there's 4.2 months of inventory. So compared to July 2021, there's a little bit more inventory in July 2022. And if we look at July 2020, there was 5,961 active listings and 1,511 sales. So there was only 3.9 months of inventory. So July 2020, we actually had significantly lower inventory compared to the sales. And in July 2019, there were 6,644 active listings at the end of the month, and there had been 1,327 sales. So there was right about that 5 months of inventory range. Based on that, you could say July 2022 is actually pretty similar market conditions to what we had in July 2019. And if you were in the market back then, maybe you weren't, probably you weren't, but it was certainly more of a buyer's market at that time. Prices were a little bit lower. You had to be realistic on your price if you were a seller, that kind of thing. And in July 2018, there were 7,623 active listings at the end of the month and 1,217 sales. So in July 2018, there was actually 6.3 months of inventory. So it was a stronger buyer's market in July of 2018 than it is this year. So that helps put it into perspective that we're not at a 5-year high for inventory or months of inventory. We're kind of right in the middle there, where we're a little worse than the last 2 years before this, but better than 2019 and 2018. Now, I mentioned this before, but we are rarely seeing multiple offer situations now. And that's just basically because of the market conditions. When we were seeing multiple offers, we had a lot less inventory. Like back in March, as we mentioned, there's been a 57% increase in the inventory that buyers have access to, while at the same time seeing less sales now than what we were having earlier this year. So it's rare to see multiple offers. If you're a seller and you heard the stories earlier this year about properties selling over list price, getting 3 or 4 or 5 or more offers, you shouldn't be expecting that anymore. It's unlikely to happen unless your property is like mint, very nice, and happens to be in certain neighborhoods that are still relatively hot. It can still happen. It can happen in any market, but it's just not the norm anymore. So that's one takeaway. If you're a seller, don't get too excited, and if you're a buyer, then you can relax and be a little bit more calm about the market conditions right now. The other thing I mentioned is that usually buyers can negotiate on price. So for example, for single family detached homes in Edmonton, the ones that sold in the last 30 days sold for an average of 95% of their original list price. So 5% below their original list price, essentially. And there's a couple distinctions that I want to point out there. So the key word is the original list price. So it's not talking about the current list price. So if a property was listed at $100,000 and it sold for $95,000, you might think that that's an example of what I just showed here, because that would be 5% less than the current list price. But if that property had actually been listed at a higher price previously and they had gone through price reductions, then that would actually be more than 5% below. Like if it had been at $105,000 and then sold for $95,000, that would be more than 5% below the original list price. So that 95% of original list price is taking into account price reductions as well. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you can look at any property that's listed and just assume that on average you could get it for 5% less. That would be an inaccurate assumption. That's another calculation that I can do. I didn't do that for today, but that's probably closer to 97% of current list price on average, just off the top of my head. But the main takeaway here is it shows that generally buyers are able to negotiate on price, whereas we used to have some months earlier this year where it was pretty much on average 100% of list price, at least for single family homes, not condos. And it does vary between the two different types of properties, but it's much different market conditions than what we had before, where prices were going up and there was multiple offers and all that kind of thing. Now you're seeing people being able to negotiate a little bit on the price. You're seeing some price reductions, and you're seeing people get properties for less than list price. So if that process continues over time, you will see the values drop a little bit over time, which kind of brings me to the next point that I wanted to talk about in terms of single family homes. Just looking at the current months of inventory for single family homes, we talked about the market as a whole, but for single family homes, just in the last 30 days in Edmonton, there's been 601 sales, and there was 3,111 active listings when I pulled the data. So that actually gives you a 5.17 months of inventory, or a 19.3% absorption rate. So if that continues with that kind of level of inventory compared to sales, sitting at over 5 months of inventory, we're in that sort of zone where prices can start to drop. So if these market conditions continue at this pace, you will see prices drop over time in single family homes. I didn't pull the same data for condos. It's probably a little worse for condos, as it has been for quite some time. But that's another thing to keep in mind, that when you're pricing your property, if you're a seller, it makes it incredibly important to actually price it right. Because if you price your property at, let's say, $400,000 and it's only currently worth $390,000 or $385,000, and you don't sell it right away, what can happen is the market could actually drop a little bit more. Maybe it's $5,000 less or $10,000 less over time. And if you started high and then start trying to chase the market, you could actually end up with less for your property than if you would have just priced it right from the beginning, because you're essentially chasing the market down at that point. I'm not seeing like rapid decreases in prices. We have seen that the market has softened, and overall you can get properties for cheaper than you could earlier this year, but we haven't lost all the gains that we got earlier this year. It is possible that we could, as we get further into the winter months, is probably when it'll be at its worst, when there's even less sales, and the people that have to sell usually have to be even more flexible in the winter months regardless of the year. There is a seasonality to the real estate market as well. So if you're looking at getting the best deal possible, If you can handle buying a house and moving in the winter, then that would be the best time. If you're a buyer or a first-time home buyer, I always try to recommend, well, I wouldn't say I always try to recommend it. There are some downsides as well. But if that's the most important thing to you, is trying to get the lowest price, then buying in November, December, January generally is going to be your best bet. Obviously, it's not always going to work out that way because it does depend on some other market conditions, but that's where the seasonality of real estate comes in, where like on average prices are lower in the winter months than they are in the spring. Right now we have high inventory, so there's a lot to choose from for buyers, which is really nice, especially compared to earlier this year. Whereas if you wait to buy later into the fall and winter, the inventory levels tend to dwindle, so you'll have less to choose from. So you might be able to get a better price later in the fall and in the winter, but you'll have less to choose from. So sometimes a complaint I see from buyers is that, oh, there's like nothing to choose from, I can't find what we like. And then what sometimes happens, as I have clients that have been looking to buy in the winter and they couldn't find what they were looking for, and then they don't really end up finding the properties that they're happy with until in the spring, when there are more listings hitting the market and there's higher volume of listings, but there's also a lot more competition from buyers. So your plan could switch from hoping to buy when prices are at their lowest but not being able to find the right thing, and then all of a sudden now you're buying in the spring market and you're doing the exact opposite of the strategy you were probably hoping to do by getting a good deal in the winter and instead buying in the spring instead. So something to keep in mind there. One of the advantages of buying a property right now is that we are more than likely near our peak inventory for the year. Obviously, if sales volume drops a lot and a bunch of people decide to list, that can always change, but there is a lot to choose from right now. So as a buyer, you're getting into a market where you're not competing on houses as often, you're able to negotiate on price, and you also have a lot to work with. Obviously, there's the risk that prices could go down a little bit if the current market conditions continue and if they raise interest rates a lot more. So that's obviously a risk, but a huge plus is that you've got way more to choose from right now. There's a lot of nice properties out there and not as many people going after them. I do think we'll have a little bit of an uptick in activity as we get into September. A lot of people are still trying to take advantage of the last week or so here of summer holidays, but once we get back to school, second week of September, there's usually another push from some really serious buyers at that time. So if you wait till then, you might actually end up with a little bit more competition if you're a buyer going after some of those really nice properties. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. There's no perfect time to buy. I have another video that I recorded recently talking about how there's never really a perfect time to buy. It's hard to time the market just perfectly. If you want, you can check out that video. But I thought I'd just kind of point out a couple things there from a buyer's perspective. If you're a seller, it depends if you are just selling your property and you're just going to be out of the market, or you're moving away somewhere else, for example, versus if you're selling a property and buying another one. Like I mentioned earlier, we still have some of the gains that we got earlier this year in home values. So even though you can't necessarily sell your house for as much as you could have sold it for in April, you can still sell it for more than what you could have in 2021. So if you're not buying another house and you're thinking about selling, it might still be a good time to sell because the prices could be lower next year if the current market conditions continue. And if you're just kind of hoping, oh, maybe prices will be higher again next year, right now I'm not seeing a whole lot of evidence for that unless the Bank of Canada decided to start lowering interest rates next year. Obviously, once we get into the spring next year, I'll have a bit of a better idea when I see how much demand we have from buyers. There could be a lot of people on the sidelines right now that have been wanting to buy a house and they're just kind of watching to see what's going on with the market, trying to feel it out, see how stable it is. I'm not sure how patient all those buyers are going to be. Ultimately, when people are ready to buy a house, it's pretty common for them to want to make that happen within a year or so of when they originally planned to buy a house. And it's hard to kind of sit around for years and years waiting to see what happens with the market. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people that would have bought right now, but they're feeling uneasy about the market. They're feeling a little uncertain. But once we get into the spring, if the market's still relatively stable, they're wanting to get that house, I wouldn't be shocked if we see more people coming out in the spring. And that's just part of the seasonality of the real estate market. Like if you're like the average person, when you naturally feel like it is a good time to get out and buy a house, if you're like most people or the majority of people, there's a good chance that's going to be in the spring and early summer, and that would make you typical. If you're wanting to go against the norm, then that's how you get out of that sort of seasonality of real estate and potentially buy in the winter months. But if you're just going on your instincts, there's a good chance your instincts are going to be like the instincts of most of the other people, and you're going to get urges to get out into the real estate market in the spring and early summer months. So just something to think about as well. I think I got a couple more things here I wanted to share with you about August. So like I said, we're not done for the month yet. When I'm recording this will probably be up a little bit later. But I wanted to also look at, okay, well, how are the number of sales that are happening in August comparing to other Augusts, essentially? So far in 2022 in August, there's been 835 sales that I'm able to see on the MLS, and we still have a week to go. In reality, some of the sales that have happened in the last week won't have been reported yet, but based on those 835 sales, I think we could end up with approximately 1,113 sales by the end of the month. Obviously, we'll see once it comes in. Sometimes there's a fair amount of variance by week, but I'm just looking at, how many sales have there been in the last 3 weeks, and if it's kind of the same pace, that's maybe how many sales will end up for the month. So that would bring us close to some numbers from previous years here. So in August 2021, we had 1,430 sales, which was pretty high. In August 2020, there was 1,262 sales. August 2019, there was 1,104 sales, and in August 2018, there was 1,152, and also 1,152 in August 2017. So if my estimate's correct and we end up around 1,113 sales by the end of the month, that would bring us pretty close to 2019 sales numbers, or perhaps 2017 or 2018 numbers. So it's not great number of sales, but it's not that bad either. So we're still seeing sales that are pretty close to some numbers that we saw in the last 5 years. It's not like some of the other markets, like I've heard in Vancouver that they might have been at like a 20-year low. Don't totally quote me on that, but you can find that information if you search it, like a 20-year low in terms of number of sales. Or something like that. So we're nowhere near that here in Edmonton. I only looked at the last 5 or 6 years, but I can tell we're more than likely not even at a 5-year low. And we had some of those years in there, like 2017, 2018, that were a little slower. So it does show that we're getting back to some market conditions that are not exactly unusual for Edmonton, at least in the recent past. So it shouldn't be that scary for you. I hope this has kind of been valuable. I had some comments on some of my other market update videos. I had to laugh. Somebody said, why don't you just talk in layman's terms instead of talking about statistics that nobody cares about? And I had to laugh to myself, because I get other comments where people are like, oh, thanks so much for going into detail about all this stuff. I love it. But it just goes to show that some people want the stats, other people just want to know how it is. So in this video, I did a mix again. Sorry if you don't like stats, but the stats are what allows you to actually put into perspective what's going on. But I wanted to give you some layman terms as well on, how is the market actually doing? What can you expect if you're a buyer or seller? Hopefully that's been useful for you. If you haven't figured it out already, I am a real estate agent here in Edmonton with YEG Pro Realty. So if you're looking at buying or selling a home in Edmonton or any of the surrounding cities or suburbs around Edmonton, including rural properties, I can definitely help you with that. And I can give you a lot more specific advice than what you're seeing in this video. So this is general advice and guidance. But once I've talked to you on the phone and found out what you're looking to do, what your situation is, I can give you even more specific guidance and insights that I think will be really helpful for you in helping you to make a decision whether you should be buying or selling right now, or how you should be positioning yourself in the market. So I encourage you to reach out to me at 780-819-5508, or go to booktrevornow.com, select a time on my calendar, and then I will call you. Totally free consultation, there's no pressure. I just want to basically help you out. We'll talk on the phone. I'll see how I can help you. And at the very least, you'll get some valuable insights from our call. And then hopefully, if you like me and it looks like it's a good time for you to make a move right now, you can become a client and I can help you either buy a property in the Edmonton area or sell a property in the Edmonton area. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. You can click over here to subscribe, and you can click over here to check out another video. So I'll see you on the next video. Thanks so much.